I am a single mom of 3 beautiful, hungry teenage boys. I am a credit analyst in Goleta, California, and I had a near-death experience. I came into this world, I like to say, as a fighter, and my story is not one of a victim, but it is one of a woman who has found her voice, who learned to thrive. I don't have many memories of when I was a child, but I do remember one incident. I was 5, 6 years old. I was standing in the doorway that connected the living room to the kitchen. And when you were looking into the kitchen, to the right was our dining room table and a door that led out to the garage, and my mom was standing in front of the door. My parents were arguing. Their voices were rising, and they started to yell at each other. My dad started to go crazy, and he started to pick up objects off of the island counter and threw them at my mom. He threw the toaster, he threw a blender, a can opener. When he ran out of small appliances, then he started throwing the pots and pans. And he was throwing them with such force that when they hit the door, they left dents in the door. My mom was crying. She was begging him to stop. She was dodging the items. I was terrified, and I felt like my dad was going to kill my mom. My dad never replaced that door, and so it served as a constant reminder of his abuse and his anger. When I was around 7 years old, I had the 8-year-old daughter of the woman that my dad was dating come to my twin brother and me and tell us that my dad was hurting her, that he was sexually assaulting her. We were scared. We were confused. We didn't know what to do. We were extremely scared of my father. We didn't say anything. We didn't tell anyone. We let it go. My parents were divorced when I was 6 years old. And then my mom remarried 6 times and divorced 6 times while I was growing up. So that meant we lived in a lot of different places. We lived in 4 different states, and that meant I went to a lot of different schools. I was a sensitive child. I was a people pleaser, and because of that, I was an easy target, and I was bullied grade school through high school. So that was a challenging time for me. When I was 14, I found out why my parents got a divorce. My father had been molesting my 2 older half-sisters, which validated what I knew about him, that he was a predator and a pedophile. I had found out that he had remarried, and I had 2 baby stepsisters, or 2 small stepsisters, and a new baby half-sister. And at that time, they were around 3 and 5, and then the baby. I lived with, after I went and I visited them and I met them, and I went home, and I always had this feeling just nagging at me that my dad may be hurting my stepsisters. So I came up with a plan, and I called and I asked if I could visit, and I took the girls to the park. Separately, I talked to both of them, and I asked them if dad had ever hurt them. They both told me no. So I chose to believe them, even though there were lots of signals and signs. You know, my dad had this need for control through manipulation. He would tell us that he thought we were so beautiful and he loved us so much, but then he'd ask us to dance for him. He had this need to be dominant, domineering, and forceful, and he did that by, verbal or mental abuse, physical abuse, even to my brother, my twin brother. He would ask us to dance for him. He would ask us to sit on his lap. He would ask us to rub his back. He would rub our backs. He had this drawer in the kitchen that he had hundreds of photographs of the girls. And the girls were fully dressed, but they were poses like hands on their hips or laying on their sides on the couch. Outsider, you would look at those photos, you'd think they were innocent. There was nothing wrong with those photos. But for my father, who was sick and who was a predator, that was porn for him. In every single home that he owned or that he lived in, there was one obscure room that only had a mattress in it and a lock on the door. And I chose to ignore those signs, and I went on living my life, and I never saw my stepsisters again. When I was 26 years old, I married a high-functioning alcoholic, a narcissist, and a womanizer. I knew that when I was marrying him. I've always had a connection with spirit. I always knew that there was a higher source, a higher power. And I kept receiving messages, don't marry him, don't do it, don't marry him. I called off the wedding 3 times, and I still married him. I was so desperate for security and a family of my own. I had no self-worth, no self-identity, so I married him. I went through with it. I was married to him for 11 years, and during that time, I endured emotional, mental, verbal abuse from him. I don't regret it at all. I have 3 loving, supportive, amazing boys, and I learned about myself, and I learned a lot about life. At that time, I didn't see the patterns. I mean, I can see now, looking back, that why I married an abusive man is because I grew up in an abusive household, but I didn't put the patterns together. In 1999, I was pregnant with my first child, my first son, and I found out that my father had been tried and sentenced for child molestation. He was given the maximum sentence in the state that he was charged and convicted in at that time, which was 44 years. I was given the option to write a letter to the judge before the sentencing. I chose to follow through, and I wrote the letter, and I did recommend that he receive the maximum sentence, and he did. In 2004, it was May 29th, that was the day of my near-death experience. I woke up that morning in labor. It was different than my other 2 pregnancies in that when I sat or I lied down, I was in immense pain. So I ate my breakfast standing up. On the ride to the hospital, I propped myself up with my arms, sitting all the way down to take off some of that pressure and some of the pain. When we arrived at the hospital, I was required to sit in a wheelchair to be admitted, even though I told them I was in pain. We finally made it into the delivery room. I was standing at the side of the bed, and I was breathing through a contraction, and my water broke. At that point, the nurse turned to me, and she looked at me, and she told me that both the doctors that were on call that day were delivering twins in C-sections, and that she would be delivering the baby. And I instantly knew that something was wrong, something was off. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew that this is not going to go well. She told me if I wanted to have the baby, I had to lie down. I said, no, I'm in pain. I want to deliver standing up. I knew you could deliver standing up, but she told me absolutely not. You want to have this child, you need to lie down. So I lied down in the bed, pain through my entire body. It was awful. So I told her I have to push. She told me I could, and it was just a couple pushes later, I delivered my 3rd beautiful son. They handed him to me, placed him on my chest, and I got to smell him and kiss him, tell him I love him. Then they took him over to clean him up and check his vitals. The nurse then came back over to me and told me to push to deliver the placenta. I pushed, nothing happened. Same thing, the 2nd try, I pushed, nothing happened. So on the 3rd try, she pulled on the umbilical cord at the same time that I pushed, and the pain, again, just horrific pain. She did that 3 or 4 more times, and I was in tears, and she stopped. And I noticed that the energy in the room changed. Everyone started to move very quickly. They were talking very quietly, and I heard the nurse page the doctor. He came in, he went directly to the nurse. They had a quick, quiet conversation. Then he came over to me. He asked me to push. I pushed, nothing happened. 2nd time, he pulled on the umbilical cord, it came off. So now I had the placenta inside of me and no cord attached. So he reached his hand inside of me to try to manually remove the placenta, and the pain was overwhelming. I thought I was going to pass out. Again, I'm crying and I'm begging with him to please stop, please stop. So he made the decision to stop. He called in the anesthesiologist, who came in with a little tablet, who told me to put it under my tongue, and it would dissolve and help with the pain. It didn't help. So they made the decision, because I started to bleed out and the situation was becoming dire, that I needed to go to the operating room. I do remember when they were rolling me out that I just had one thought, and that was, I need to tell my husband not to leave the baby. No matter what, he needs to stay with the baby. Anesthesiologist walked over, placed the oxygen mask over my face, asked me to start counting backwards from 100, and I thought to myself, stay awake, don't go to sleep. And I tried fighting it, but I was out. When I woke up, I was in heaven, and I like to call it home. I was bathed in this beautiful, warm, golden light, and I was surrounded by angels. I was surrounded by my loved ones. I was in the center, and they were all around me, and it was their outlines I was seeing, but it was more than an outline. It was vibration. It was their energy. I was me. I felt what I looked like. It didn't change, but I didn't have a body. I was my vibration, the energy. And I instantly knew that we were all connected, that we were all one. Everyone's energy, everyone's vibration, the divine beings and myself, we all had our own rate of vibration and our own color. And they weaved in and out of each other's. It was like a beautiful harmonic progression. And they made these patterns, and it was deeply profound and deeply beautiful. The light that I was bathed in, and the oneness and the connection and the peace, the contentment, the love that I felt was overwhelming. The light was like wrapping the softest cashmere sweater or blanket that you can imagine that was infused with golden sunshine around you. And it was a feeling for me of exhaling, of finding my center, and of knowing that I was safe and I was sound. Being there was more real than it is here. I felt total peace, contentment, happiness. It was just much more deep and profound. There really are no words to accurately do justice to the experience and what I had felt. It doesn't exist here in our vocabulary. Magnify that, multiply that times 100 million, more. I mean, and that's the feeling of unconditional love and peace and happiness that I was a part of, that I was bathed in. And I can get back there too. Not 100% feeling like I did, but through meditation, I can get back to that being in that warmth and that light. No words were spoken. And when I asked a question, it was answered immediately. It was answered when I started asking the question, in fact. And time there does not exist as we know it. I kept receiving messages at the same time, but separately. And there were 3 messages that I received over and over again. And those were that we are unconditionally loved, that everything's always how it's supposed to be, and that everything will always be all right. And I knew instantly that if I didn't go back to my husband, my family, my friends, my 3 beautiful little babies, I knew that they'd be okay. I was shown the past, not just my past, but the past of everyone and everything. And I just had this knowing. I knew and I understood why everything happened. I understood that going forward in the future, there is a higher purpose and there is a reason for everything, good and bad. I wanted to stay, and I wasn't given the option, and I woke up with the doctor yelling at me to open my eyes. I was cold, I was heavy, I was angry that the doctor woke me up, I was angry that he was so mean when he woke me up, I was angry to be back in my body, and all I wanted to do was go back home, because when I was at home, it was just love, peace, joy, creativity, contentment, happiness. There was no cruelty, hate, violence, judgment. It was pure, unconditional love. And I understood when I was at home that we're made up of energy. Energy is made up of this pure, unconditional love, and that love is God. And I understood that. And I did not want to be back here. I wanted to be home. So what had happened the next day when I was in the recovery room, a hospital official came into my room. He had a suit and a tie, and he had a clipboard full of papers. He introduced himself, and he asked me if I remembered anything. And I thought that was really strange because that didn't happen after my first 2 deliveries. And I looked at my husband, I glanced at him, he shook his head like this. And I looked at the hospital official and I said, no, I didn't remember anything. He handed me the clipboard, he asked me to sign the papers. I didn't look at him, I signed him, I handed him back, and he left. The doctor didn't say anything to me, he didn't say anything to me, the nurses didn't say anything to me, but I knew that something had happened, I knew. And 10 years later, I'd ordered my medical records, and it had stated, my heart had stopped in the OR, and it had stated that I had complications due from heart disease. I have mitral valve prolapse. It's called MVP, and that's when the left atrium opens up like a parachute during a heart's contraction. And they had cited that it was due to MVP that caused my heart to stop. No, because the next day in the delivery room, I told my husband what had happened, and he looked at me with a look of embarrassment, a look of shame, told me that I was crazy, it had to have been a dream. So In that moment, I decided I'm not telling anyone. He doesn't believe me. My husband doesn't believe me. No one's going to believe me. And it was 6 to 7 years later that I finally had the courage to start talking about it. And it was only to close family members. It's real to me, and I know it happened, but why did it happen? And why did I receive the messages that I received? What was I supposed to do with that? And that took me years. Before my near-death experience, I had had many obstacles, many challenges in my life, and I had given up hope and I had lost faith. And then I had my near-death experience. I knew that even in my darkest moments, I was okay, that I would always be all right. Things are always how they're supposed to be. And I was unconditionally loved, that I'm never alone. And I had hope again. I changed my life drastically. I started to make positive changes in my life, and that was figuring out that I needed to love myself, that I was worthy and deserving of love. And when I started to realize that, I started making positive changes. Some of my family and friends thought that I was changing too much, and I lost some of them along the way because I was making the changes, because I wasn't allowing myself to be a doormat anymore. And some of my friends and family didn't like that. And I had hope again, and I knew I can get through anything because of my experience. And I had many challenges after my experience. And I feel like I was given the gift of my near-death experience to help me get through those challenges as well. Not only the challenges leading up to it, but challenges afterwards. 3 years after my experience, I filed for divorce. I had found out that my husband and my best friend of 10 years had slept together, and I had had enough. I was laid off from Montecito Bank and Trust after they had shut down the mortgage division. They outsourced it overseas. That was the first time I lost my job. In 2009, the mortgage broker that I was working for went out of business, and I lost my job for the second time. In 2014, I was working for Washington Mutual, and they shut down multiple mortgage divisions throughout California. Actually, it was Wells Fargo, and I lost my job for a third time. I received a call. My mom suffered a stroke, and that she had 2 hours to 2 weeks to live. She passed away 2 days later. My cat, and I'm a big animal lover, who I'd had for 19 years, passed away from old age. And then my dog, Lily, who was 7, this sounds so awful, passed away from a stroke. So I had suffered all this loss, and I'd gone through a divorce. Within 7 years, I was laid off 3 times. After I had lost my job, I received a letter from my landlord saying that my rent was going up from $1,900 a month to $2,100 a month. And over the years, I had cashed out my retirement. I had used my savings account to supplement my income. I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent, let alone my bills. I was in financial distress. And that night, I fell to my knees, and I was praying to God, and I was crying. And I clearly heard the 3 messages that I received during my experience. I heard them over and over again. You are unconditionally loved. Everything's always as it's supposed to be. Everything will be all right. And I knew that I was going to be okay. I woke up the next morning, and I immediately found an affordable apartment. And I had been looking for an apartment since December of 2013. And up to that point, I thought I was going to have to live out of my car. And that terrified me. And I literally took out a phone book. I opened it up to an apartment complex in Solvang. I called the property manager. His name is Bill. He picked up the phone. I explained, I live in Santa Barbara. I'm looking for a more affordable apartment. Do you have any openings? He's like, I have one that just came due. It's yours if you want it. I didn't fill out a credit application. He didn't meet me in person. He just said, it's yours if you want it. And I drove up there that day and put down a security deposit, and I had an affordable place to live. So it was after that moment of despair, and after I heard those messages of love and support, that I started using affirmations daily and gratitude. And that all goes back to my near-death experience. And I started to figure out, I was giving these messages for a reason. I was giving these messages for a purpose. And so now every day, I say my daily core affirmations, which are those 3 messages, and I say my gratitude. Affirmations for me are huge. I had used affirmations for an entire year before I was hired on with the company that I'm at now, full-time with benefits, which included a raise. So you have to stay devoted, you have to stay committed. It's not going to happen overnight. But know that if it's not okay, it's not the end. Follow your intuition, you follow that voice. You listen to that voice. Don't dismiss it. Your past doesn't define you. It wasn't a life sentence. It was a life lesson. And again, that goes back to all the challenges in my life that I experienced or will experience are learning opportunities. Learn from that experience, traumatic or good, so that you can free yourself from it and you can move on and move forward. Religious-wise, I was baptized Catholic and I was born Lutheran. But even as a young teenager in high school, I started to separate from the church because for me there was too much hypocrisy. I just saw too much hypocrisy going on. And I also struggled with the existence of hell. I couldn't understand if we had such a loving, good God, how there could be a hell. And I struggled with that. But I had always known, I always believed in God or a higher source. And I always felt like there was someone there watching over me. I mean, there were times I would get so angry. I would be so angry at God that I wouldn't talk to him or pray to him for years because I was mad. You know, things had happened, and why? Why do bad things happen? But I always knew, I always felt that he was there, they were there. I call it God, but some people call it a higher source or a higher power. People ask me now my beliefs on religion. I no longer believe in organized religion. And that's because during my experience, I was shown that all religion is correct. It's been interpreted incorrectly by man due to agenda, due to power, due to greed. So I no longer believe in organized religion. I no longer believe in hell. I believe that we create our own hell by living in fear, by basing our decisions out of fear, by choosing hate, greed, violence over compassion, love, kindness, and by not living as your authentic self and by not having self-love. If you make a decision based out of fear, it's not going to be in your highest interest. I feel like when you're on the right path, there's synchronicities and things open up and things happen. So for me, one of the lessons was forgiveness. I needed to forgive myself for not calling Child Protective Services and helping my sisters. I needed to forgive my mom and my grandparents for not reporting Jerry, my dad, when they found out what he had done to my half-sisters. I needed to forgive my bullies, including my ex-husband. I needed to forgive myself for allowing myself to be in a domineering, controlling marriage and be a doormat. I needed to forgive myself for questioning how my mom and my stepmom could not have known what Jerry was doing all those years under their own household, because I knew all too well how easy it was to ignore the signs. And I had to forgive my dad, and I did. And when I forgave all these people, I was able to free myself from being chained to them, free myself from the past. And that allowed me to move forward stronger, braver, wiser, because I was able to forgive. It took me a long time to learn forgiveness. My experience was in 2004, my near-death experience, and it's taken me many years. I'm able to forgive and able to let go, but it's not easy. We are human, and it does hurt, and these are traumatic events that happen to us. You know, and you have to process all those feelings, all those emotions. You can blame and you can play the victim, but you're going to have to let that go. Feel those feelings, but let it go. It takes a long time, and I still have to work at it. It doesn't come naturally to forgive, at least not to me. I'm asked why bad things happen. I don't know why bad things happen. I can tell you what I learned from my experience, and I learned that every challenge that I had gone through and every challenge that I will go through are learning opportunities. And my learning opportunities, what I came here to learn, was forgiveness and self-love. I feel like we've all felt down at times. We've all felt unwanted. We've all felt unworthy, and bad things happen. And we experience loss. We experience traumatic events. And what I was shown when I was home and having my experience is there is a purpose, there is a reason for everything, and we have a soul contract. And we come into this life with lessons that we are to learn. And that's so that we can evolve our souls. That's so that we can raise ourselves and our vibrations higher, so we can take a step higher towards God or towards the higher source. And my life lessons and what I contracted for in this life was to learn forgiveness and learn self-love. And I also was shown that we've all done bad things. We've all had past lives where we have not been so kind and compassionate and caring. I was shown that. So I know in a past life that maybe I was a murderer, or maybe I was a thief, or maybe I did something bad, but I've evolved. And every life that you come into and you learn a lesson, you're evolving your soul, you're evolving your spirit. You need to protect yourself, you need to ground yourself, you need to clear yourself, and then go into meditation so that you can quiet the mind so that you can hear. You can hear your guides. For everybody, it's different. I will get a thought, and it sounds like myself, but I know now it's not. If it just comes out of nowhere and it's not me thinking about it, I know it's my guide. Sometimes I'll see them, or sometimes I'll get a symbol. But for me, most of the time, it's a thought that pops into my head. And for everybody, it's different. But everybody is psychic. Everybody has the ability to self-heal. It's whether or not you believe in it, whether or not you're open to it, and whether or not you're going to listen. Because a lot of times they're talking to you, you're just dismissing it. And it took me a long time to listen to my guides, open up to my guides, and trust them. When let's say you go to bed at night and there's a problem on your mind, and you're like, how am I going to solve this problem? And you wake up in the morning and the answer's in your head. Do you think that was you, or do you think maybe that is a guide or someone in spirit helping you get the correct answer? When our guides or our angels come down to help us, we have to ask for help. They can't intervene unless we ask for help. We have free will on this side and the other side, but we are all connected and we all one. And at the end of 2013, when I was laid off for the third time, that's when I started to study spiritual modalities, different spiritual modalities. I'd always been drawn to crystals, to spirit, to pendulum. And during that time also, I realized that I had the ability to self-heal. And not only myself, but I could help others to heal, because I can actually see their physical, mental, or emotional pain. And I can channel energy through me, and I can help them to heal. So I realized that I had that ability, and I'd studied angel classes, I'd studied cards, I'd studied the pendulum, I became a Reiki master, and I had a small business for a few years that was called Ace Holistic Healing, and I used my connection to the angels, I used crystal resonance therapy, and I used energy healing to help my clients. And it was all because of my layoff the third time, and I had time in there that I started to study this and realize this, and I allowed my gifts to start opening. Even though I always had them, that was the time that I started to allow them, because there wasn't anything wrong with me. So during my studies, I found this group of people called empaths, and the relief that I felt knowing that there was nothing wrong with me, that being sensitive was a positive trait, not a character flaw, was liberating for me, because I had grown up different. I had always felt like an imposter, like an outcast, and I was told that I was too sensitive, and that was a negative for me. So to find this group of people and to realize that I'm not alone, there are other people like me, and I'm normal, was eye-opening. I feel emotions very easily, and I pick up individually. I can walk into a room and I know if I'm welcome, and I pick it up in community and global light too. And to me, it feels like we're starting to wake up. The world is starting to wake up. It's starting to shift. We have all this bad happening right now, and I feel like it has to. It's got to get to that point where it comes up so that we can make the changes, so we can wake up and go, this isn't okay, this isn't right. And we've been maybe not told the truth, and we've been maybe believing some lies, and we need to look at things differently, and we need to change. And I feel the shift. I feel it is. I don't know if it's going to be happening in our lifetime or our children's lifetime, but it is starting to change.